My in-laws forced me to sign a prenup to prove I wasn't a gold digger, but I outsmarted them and watched their legacy crumble publicly. I never thought a piece of paper I signed 6 years ago would become the weapon that protected me from my own wife's family. But sometimes life has a twisted sense of justice. My name is Alexander Pierce, and I'm 38 years old. Today I run a venture capital fund here in New York, specializing in tech startups that are reshaping the digital landscape. But 8 years ago, I was nobody special. Just another software engineer grinding away at a mid-sized consulting company, pulling down decent money, but nothing that would make anyone look twice. I had my small apartment in Queens, my reliable car, and a predictable routine that felt safe but uninspiring. That's when fate intervened at Jake Morrison's wedding, and I met Sarah Crawford. The moment I saw her across that crowded reception hall, I knew my life was about to change completely. Sarah was everything I'd ever dreamed of finding in a woman. Strikingly intelligent in a way that made conversations feel like adventures. Beautiful in that effortless way that made other people turn their heads when she walked by. And blessed with this infectious laugh that could light up any room and make even the most mundane topics seem fascinating. She worked as an art curator at one of the city's most prestigious galleries, and when she talked about Renaissance paintings or contemporary sculptures, her entire face would transform with genuine passion. Her eyes would literally sparkle as she described the brushwork in a Caravaggio or the emotional depth of a Rodin sculpture. I fell for her completely and utterly, and somehow, through some miracle I still don't fully understand, she fell for me too. Her family, however, was an entirely different story that I should have paid more attention to from the very beginning. Richard Crawford was a recently retired corporate lawyer who'd built his considerable fortune representing some of Manhattan's most powerful real estate developers and construction magnates. At 62, he carried himself with the kind of absolute confidence that only comes from decades of winning high-stakes negotiations and never backing down from a fight. Every gesture, every word, every carefully calculated pause in conversation demonstrated that this was a man who understood power and knew exactly how to wield it. His wife, Evelyn, owned and operated a chain of high-end jewelry stores that catered exclusively to Manhattan's social elite, the kind of clientele who thought nothing of dropping $50,000 on a necklace for a charity gala. Together, they'd accumulated a considerable fortune that I later learned totaled around $10 million in liquid assets, not counting their stunning Park Avenue penthouse and their sprawling summer estate in the Hamptons. When Sarah and I got engaged after 2 wonderful years of dating, I was absolutely over the moon with happiness. I genuinely believed her parents had not only accepted me, but had actually grown to like me, especially after Richard started regularly inviting me to play golf at his exclusive country club, and including me in family conversations about business and investments. I thought I'd successfully navigated the challenging waters of dating above my social class. That's exactly why what happened next caught me so completely off guard that I'm still processing it years later. 3 weeks before our carefully planned wedding, Richard asked me to meet him at his law office for what he described as a brief discussion about some paperwork. The mahogany-paneled room felt deliberately intimidating, with its floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with leather-bound legal volumes and oil paintings of stern-looking judges who seemed to be staring down at me with disapproving expressions. He gestured for me to sit in the chair across from his imposing desk, then slid a thick document across the polished wood surface with a smile that somehow didn't quite reach his calculating eyes. "Alexander, we need to discuss something very important," he said, his voice immediately taking on that formal lawyer tone I'd come to recognize and secretly dread. "It's about protecting the family's assets and ensuring everyone's future security." The document was a prenuptial agreement, and as I flipped through page after page of dense legal language, my stomach dropped further with each clause I managed to decipher. The terms weren't just harsh, they were absolutely brutal in their completeness. Each party would retain all assets acquired before marriage, with no claim whatsoever on the other's premarital wealth. In case of divorce, there would be no alimony payments, no asset sharing, nothing that resembled the financial partnership I thought marriage was supposed to represent. I would essentially walk away with whatever I'd brought into the marriage, which wasn't much by anyone's standards. "This is just standard procedure," Richard assured me smoothly when he noticed my expression had shifted from confusion to something approaching horror. "Sarah comes from a wealthy family, and we need to protect what we've built over several generations of hard work. I'm sure a smart man like you understands the importance of that. I looked at the numbers again, and the disparity was staggering and humiliating. Their assets, $10 million. Mine, about $50,000 in savings and a modest $401k that I'd been contributing to for 6 years. The message couldn't have been clearer if they'd written it in neon letters. They saw me as nothing more than a potential gold digger who needed to be legally restrained from accessing their precious family fortune. "What does Sarah think about this?" I asked. "She agrees it's necessary. In fact, she insisted on it." His words felt like a punch to the gut. "She wants to make sure your love is genuine, not motivated by financial gain." I could have walked away right then. Part of me wanted to, but I loved Sarah more than my pride, and I convinced myself that money didn't matter when you had real love. So I signed the damn thing. The wedding was beautiful, and for the first few years of our marriage, the prenup was just a forgotten piece of paper in Richard's filing cabinet. Sarah and I were happy, building our life together in a cozy apartment in Brooklyn. I worked hard, got promoted a few times, and we talked about starting a family someday. But then something unexpected happened. I discovered I had a talent for investing. It started small. I'd always been good with numbers and technology, so I began researching emerging tech companies in my spare time. I made a few small investments that paid off remarkably well. A startup I'd invested $5,000 in got acquired by Google for a massive profit. Another investment in a cryptocurrency platform returned 20 times my initial investment. Word spread in my professional network, and soon I was getting offers to manage other people's investments. I started my own fund 3 years ago, and it took off like a rocket. My clients included some of the biggest names in tech, and my track record was nearly flawless. By last year, my personal net worth had grown to around $50 million. The irony wasn't lost on me. The family that had insisted on a prenup to protect their $10 million fortune was now watching their son-in-law accumulate wealth at 5 times their rate. And that's when things started getting weird. It began subtly. Richard, who'd barely shown interest in my work beyond polite dinner conversation, suddenly became fascinated with my investment strategies. "Tell me about this fund of yours, Alex," he'd say over Sunday brunch. "How exactly does the profit sharing work?" Evelyn started asking pointed questions about our lifestyle. "That's a beautiful watch, dear," she'd tell Sarah. "Is that from Alexander's recent success?" She'd say the word success like it left a bad taste in her mouth. The questions became more frequent, more invasive. They wanted to know about our joint accounts, our investment portfolios, our future financial plans. When Sarah and I bought a penthouse overlooking Central Park, Richard actually asked to see the purchase documents. "Just curious about the legal structure," he'd said with that lawyer smile. But the real red flag came during a family dinner 6 months ago. Richard was discussing estate planning with Sarah, and he made an offhand comment that made my blood run cold. "You know, sweetheart, that prenup we had Alexander sign was really just meant for the early years of marriage. Now that you've both proven your commitment to each other, maybe it's time to update those arrangements." Sarah looked confused. "What do you mean, Dad?" "Well, marriage is about sharing everything, isn't it? Maybe you should ask Alexander about renegotiating that agreement. Something more equitable, considering how much your lives have changed." I felt like I was watching a chess master reveal their strategy. The prenup that had once protected their assets was now protecting mine, and they wanted it gone. Over the following weeks, Sarah began bringing up the topic more frequently. "Honey, do you think we should update our prenup? I mean, we're not the same people we were 6 years ago financially." "What brought this on?" I'd ask. "I just think it would show more trust between us, more commitment to our partnership." The conversations felt rehearsed, like she was reciting lines someone else had written. My Sarah had never cared about money or legal documents. She'd always said she married me for love, not financial security. So why was she suddenly so interested in changing our prenuptial agreement? I got my answer on a Tuesday evening in March, and it shattered everything I thought I knew about my marriage. I'd come home early from the office with plans to surprise Sarah with dinner reservations at our favorite restaurant. As I walked up the stairs to our bedroom, I heard her voice through the partially open door. She was on the phone, and something about her tone made me stop and listen. "Mom, I don't know about this," she was saying. "It feels wrong, like I'm betraying him." I pressed myself against the wall, my heart pounding. Evelyn's voice came through the phone speaker, sharp and insistent. Sarah, listen to me carefully. Alexander has $50 million. $50 million, and according to that prenup, if something happens to your marriage, you get nothing. Nothing. Do you understand how insane that is? But we're happy, Sarah protested weakly. I love him. Love doesn't pay for your future, darling. What if he leaves you? What if he finds someone younger? You'll be left with nothing while he walks away with a fortune that grew during your marriage. A fortune you helped him build by being a supportive wife. I don't know. Your father has already spoken to some of the best family lawyers in the city. That prenup can be challenged. We can argue it was signed under duress, that the terms are unconscionable now that circumstances have changed so dramatically. With the right legal strategy, you could be entitled to half of everything. My legs felt weak. I gripped the banister to steady myself. But what if Alex finds out? Sarah asked. He won't, if you're smart about it. You just need to start documenting things. Keep records of how his business success has impacted your lifestyle, how you've supported his career. Build a case that shows you're entitled to marital assets regardless of what that outdated prenup says. There was a long pause before Sarah spoke again. And if he won't agree to change the prenup voluntarily, then you file for divorce and let the lawyers handle it. Honey, I've seen this before. Men get successful and they think they can just discard their wives when someone better comes along. You need to protect yourself before that happens. I can't believe we're having this conversation. Believe it. Your father and I have already set aside money for legal fees. We're not going to let some nobody engineer walk away with millions that rightfully belong to our family. I stood there in shocked silence as they continued planning my financial destruction. The woman I'd loved for 8 years, the woman I'd trusted with my heart and my future, was plotting to rob me blind with her parents' encouragement. But as the initial shock wore off, something else took its place. Not anger, not hurt, though those emotions were certainly there. What I felt was a cold, calculating fury that reminded me why I'd been so successful in business. Someone was trying to steal from me, and I didn't tolerate thieves. The next morning, I did something I'd never thought I'd have to do. I called my lawyer. Marcus Webb had handled all my business contracts for the past 5 years, and he was exactly the kind of sharp, no-nonsense attorney you wanted in your corner during a fight. When I explained the situation, he was quiet for a long moment. Alex, he finally said, I need to ask you something, and I want a completely honest answer. Is there any possibility that Sarah might have legitimate grounds to challenge this prenup? What do you mean? Were you coerced into signing it? Were the terms explained properly? Did you have independent legal counsel? I thought back to that day in Richard's office. No, I didn't have my own lawyer. Richard assured me it was standard, and I suppose you could argue I was under pressure because the wedding was 3 weeks away. That's not great. But the good news is that prenups aren't automatically invalid just because one party didn't have counsel. The question is whether the terms are unconscionable and whether you signed under duress, so they might actually be able to break it. It's possible. Family courts don't like agreements that leave one spouse destitute, especially when the other has significant wealth. But here's the thing. You're not defenseless. If they're planning to challenge the prenup, we need to be prepared for that fight. Over the next several weeks, I lived a double life. During the day, I was the loving husband, listening to Sarah's increasingly frequent hints about updating our financial arrangements. At night, I worked with Marcus to build an ironclad defense. We gathered every piece of documentation from the prenup signing. We collected evidence showing that I'd been financially stable at the time of marriage, that the agreement hadn't been unconscionable based on our circumstances then. Most importantly, we started documenting Richard and Evelyn's current behavior. I installed discrete recording apps on my phone and started capturing conversations. I kept detailed notes of every discussion about money, every suggestion from Sarah's parents, every attempt to manipulate the situation. The breakthrough came during a family dinner in May. Richard had been drinking more wine than usual, and his tongue loosened considerably. You know, Alex, he said, swirling his glass, I've been thinking about your situation. This prenup we had you sign, it made sense at the time, but now it seems almost punitive, doesn't it? I kept my expression neutral. How so? Well, look at what you've accomplished. $50 million. That's incredible success, and Sarah has been right there supporting you through it all. Don't you think she deserves to share in that success? Sarah shares in everything that matters to me, Richard. But legally speaking, she doesn't, does she? His eyes had taken on that predatory gleam I'd seen in his office 6 years ago. That prenup essentially makes her a, what would you call it? A financial outsider in her own marriage. Are you suggesting we should change it? I'm suggesting you should consider what's fair, what's right. Marriage is supposed to be a partnership, isn't it? I leaned forward, my phone recording every word. What exactly are you proposing? A simple modification. Instead of keeping all assets separate, maybe you split everything 50-50. That's what real partners do. The audacity was breathtaking. 6 years ago, this man had insisted on a prenup to protect his family's money from me. Now he wanted to tear up that same document so his daughter could claim half of mine. And if I don't agree to modify it? Richard's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. Well, that would be unfortunate. It might force Sarah to reconsider whether this marriage is really working for her. There it was, the threat, delivered with a lawyer's precision. Change the prenup or face a divorce designed to break it. I looked across the table at Sarah, hoping to see some sign that she disagreed with her father's manipulation. Instead, she was nodding along, her face set in an expression of righteous determination. Alex, she said softly, maybe Dad has a point. Maybe it is time to show more trust in our marriage. That night, I made copies of the evening's recording and sent them to Marcus along with a detailed summary of everything I'd discovered. His response came back within hours. Alex, you need to see this as what it is, a coordinated attempt to defraud you of your assets. The good news is that you have evidence. The bad news is that they're probably going to escalate soon. Are you prepared for this to get ugly? I was more than prepared. I was ready for war. The final confrontation came on a Sunday in June. Sarah's parents had invited us to their Hamptons house for what they called a family discussion about the future. As we sat on their perfectly manicured terrace overlooking the ocean, Richard pulled out a folder of documents. Alexander, we've had our lawyers draw up a new agreement, he announced with the confidence of a man who thought he held all the cards. Something more equitable for both you and Sarah. I flipped through the pages, though I already knew what I'd find. The new agreement would essentially nullify the prenup, establishing a 50-50 split of all assets acquired during the marriage. In other words, Sarah would be entitled to $25 million of my money. This is quite a change from the original prenup, I said calmly. Circumstances have changed, Evelyn chimed in. When we first insisted on that agreement, we were protecting our family's assets. Now it seems to be working against Sarah's interests. Interesting perspective. I set the documents aside and pulled out my phone. Before we go any further, I think you should hear something. I pressed play on the recording from that dinner conversation in May. Richard's voice filled the air. Marriage is supposed to be a partnership, isn't it? A simple modification. Instead of keeping all assets separate, maybe you split everything 50-50. The color drained from his face as his own words played back to him. But I wasn't done. That was from last month. But I have recordings going back much further. I played another clip, Evelyn's voice from that phone call I'd overheard. Sarah, listen to me carefully. Alexander has $50 million. $50 million! And according to that prenup, if something happens to your marriage, you get nothing. Sarah's eyes went wide with shock and horror. Alex, how did I get recordings of your mother coaching you to divorce me for money? Simple. I've been documenting this entire scheme since March. I pulled out a thick folder of my own and spread its contents across the table. Printed emails, phone records, meeting notes from Richard's consultations with divorce attorneys. Everything Marcus and I had compiled over the past several months. Here's what I know, I said, my voice steady despite the rage burning in my chest. You've been planning to either coerce me into changing our prenup or file for divorce and challenge it in court. You've consulted with multiple attorneys about breaking a contract that you insisted I signed 6 years ago. You've coached Sarah on what to say and how to build a case against me. In short, you've been orchestrating an elaborate fraud to steal my money. Richard tried to recover his composure. Now, Alex, I think you're misunderstanding. I'm not misunderstanding anything. Marcus Webb is my attorney, and he's already reviewed all of this evidence. We're prepared to file criminal charges for conspiracy to commit fraud, as well as civil suits for attempted extortion. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the ocean seemed to have stopped its eternal rhythm. Sarah, I said, turning to my wife, I need you to understand something. Your parents didn't just betray me, they betrayed you too. They used your love for me as a weapon to try to steal from me. They turned you into an unwitting accomplice in their scheme. Tears were streaming down her face. Alex, I swear I didn't know. I knew Mom was pushing me to talk to you about the prenup, but I thought she was just looking out for my future. I never knew about the recordings or the lawyers or any of this. I studied her face, looking for any sign of deception. What I saw was genuine shock and horror at what her parents had done. Here's what's going to happen, I announced to the table. Sarah, you have a choice to make. You can stand with your parents in their scheme to defraud me, in which case I'll file for divorce under the terms of our existing prenup and you'll walk away with nothing. Or you can distance yourself from this plot, cut contact with your parents until they make genuine amends, and we can work on rebuilding our marriage. And us? Richard asked, his voice barely above a whisper. You're going to apologize, publicly. You're going to admit that you tried to manipulate your daughter into divorcing me for financial gain. You're going to reimburse me for the legal fees I've incurred defending myself against your scheme. And you're going to stay the hell away from my marriage. And if we don't? Evelyn challenged, though her voice lacked its usual authority. I smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. Then I release everything, the recordings, the documents, the evidence of your conspiracy. Richard, you're a retired lawyer. You know how the legal community feels about attorneys who try to defraud their own family members. Evelyn, I wonder how your high-end clientele would react to knowing they're doing business with someone who plots to steal from her son-in-law. The power dynamic in the room had shifted completely. 6 years ago, I'd been the outsider begging for acceptance into their family. Now I held their reputations, their social standing, and their future in my hands. Sarah was the first to speak. Mom, Dad, how could you do this to us? Sweetheart, we were trying to protect you. Evelyn started. Protect me? You were using me. You made me doubt my husband, doubt my marriage, doubt everything I thought I knew about my life. Richard tried a different approach. Sarah, you have to understand, when someone accumulates that much wealth during a marriage, stop. Sarah's voice was sharp with anger I'd never heard before. Just stop. Alex is right. You didn't just betray him, you betrayed me too. You made me complicit in something horrible without even telling me what you were doing. She turned to me, her eyes still wet with tears. Alex, I choose you. I choose our marriage. And I am so sorry for what they put you through, what they put us through. The relief I felt was overwhelming. Despite everything, despite the betrayal and the scheming and the lies, Sarah was still the woman I'd fallen in love with. She'd been manipulated, not malicious. But I wasn't done with her parents. Richard, Evelyn, I want your answer now. Public apology and restitution, or I burn your reputations to the ground. They exchanged a look that spoke volumes. They knew they were beaten. We'll do it, Richard said quietly. We'll make this right. 3 months later, I was sitting in my office reviewing the final paperwork from our family lawyers. True to their word, Richard and Evelyn had issued a public apology, a carefully worded statement admitting they'd inappropriately interfered in their daughter's marriage and had acted without her knowledge or consent. They'd reimbursed my legal fees and agreed to attend family counseling before having any contact with Sarah. More importantly, Sarah and I had done something that 6 years ago would have seemed impossible. We'd torn up the prenup entirely, not because her parents had demanded it, not because we were forced to by legal challenges, but because we chose to. We'd rebuilt our marriage on a foundation of genuine trust and transparency. We'd opened joint accounts, shared our investment portfolios, and started making financial decisions as true partners. The irony was perfect. Richard and Evelyn had spent months trying to eliminate a prenup that was protecting my money from their daughter. In the end, their scheming had brought Sarah and me closer together, and we'd voluntarily done what they'd been plotting to force. But the most satisfying part came 6 months after our confrontation in the Hamptons. I was reading the business section of the Times when I saw a small article that made me smile. Prominent Manhattan jewelry store chain sold after financial difficulties. Evelyn's stores had struggled after several high-profile clients learned about the family scandal. It turns out that wealthy New Yorkers don't like doing business with people who plot against their own families. Richard had fared little better. Word of his attempted fraud had spread through the legal community, and his reputation as an ethical attorney was in ruins. Several charitable boards had quietly asked him to resign, and his country club membership had been suspended pending review. They'd lost far more trying to steal my money than they ever could have gained if they'd succeeded. As I closed the newspaper and looked out at the Manhattan skyline, I reflected on the lessons I'd learned. The prenup that was meant to protect their money from me had ultimately protected my money from them. The document they'd forced me to sign as proof that I wasn't a gold digger had prevented them from becoming gold diggers themselves. Sometimes the very weapons people use to control you become the shields that protect you from their future attacks. Sarah walked into my office carrying 2 cups of coffee, just like she used to do when we were newlyweds living in that tiny Brooklyn apartment. She set one on my desk and kissed the top of my head. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "Just appreciating the irony of life," I said, pulling her down onto my lap. "Your parents spent so much energy trying to protect their 10 million from me. They never considered that someday they might want to protect me from their 10 million. She laughed, and it was the same infectious sound that had made me fall in love with her 8 years ago. "Do you ever regret it, marrying into such a complicated family?" I thought about it for a moment. No, because it led me to you, and because it taught me something important about trust and partnership and what marriage really means, which is that real love isn't about protecting yourself from your partner. It's about choosing to be vulnerable with them, again and again, even when it's scary. She smiled and kissed me properly this time. "I love you, Alex, for real this time, with no contracts or conditions or complications. I love you too. And Sarah? Yeah? The next time your parents want to have a family discussion about the future, maybe we should just send them a copy of our joint tax return and call it a day." We laughed together, and I realized that sometimes the best revenge is simply living well, and being smart enough to protect yourself while you do it. The prenup that was supposed to prove I wasn't after their money had ended up proving they were after mine. But in the end, the only thing that really mattered was that Sarah and I had chosen each other, freely and completely, without any contracts or conditions standing between us. Sometimes the best protection is simply refusing to be afraid of the people who claim to love you. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let the people who try to control you reveal exactly who they really are.